So we must do two things, two great things together, to encompass that enormous new view that lies before us, but to encompass it within the framework of science, to see it within the whole categorical framework of science, and to see that these two are not separate, but that they are wedded. The bigness of the idea, the newness of the idea, the greatness of it is one with the structure of science, the structure of being itself. All right, so we're just looking at that very first subtone of mind is mind, and seeing the difference between the first record and the second record, namely that everything begins with the light of mind, the breaking in of the light of mind. Mind really saying, I create everything in ideas. In ideas. You get a sense of the integrity of that light. Why do I say that? Because the moment I look at the second record, and you see, as I look at the second record, I see the first record more clearly. I see more about the first record when I look at the second. This is a feedback process going on, a feeding back, that I get new information, more information from looking at the second record. And Mrs. Eddy makes a very definite statement about that. We'll take it later because I don't have it right before me, but of the value of the second record, you see, that it brings to light the beauty of the first in a way that wouldn't appear otherwise. The I am not just shows you what the I am is. What I am. And I just love that sense of that breaking in from above, that nothing can stop that light. It's irresistible. It's the beginning of the whole creative act, the whole fulfillment of the creative act is with that light and in that light, versus in the second record that mist. But there went up a mist from the earth, from a false basis. In the first record, the true basis is from above, isn't it? It's a breaking in. So you have a basis. Often we think of it at the bottom, that you have a basis at the bottom, but it's that boundless basis of science that is the basis of the first day of creation, whereas we have the false basis from the earth, from the ground, from beneath, which is a characterization of nothingness, from nothingness. So we have the origin of nothingness, and nothingness is its own origin, and will returns to its own nothingness. So it's the revelation of mind, the intelligence of mind, versus the mist of darkness, of ignorance. You have a mist. It's a kind of a characterizing of the mental atmosphere. What is your mental atmosphere? Is it misty? Is it obscured? Is it darkened? You see? If you have a mist, something is concealed. It's dimmed. It's the opposite of the light of mind. It's like having a haze in front of your eyes, or a fog, isn't it? That mist is a fog, a state of mental vagueness or bewilderment.
It isn't dark. It's a little bit above dark.
It would be,
You can see it.
yeah, it's a darkened, obscured sense, but there's some light
Some light
there,
there.
maybe you're feeling. Yeah, yeah. Very nice, thank you. Yeah. So let's look at the second subtone then, mind as spirit. And the epitome here is mind's ideas are only good. So mind creates all in ideas. Mind's ideas are only good. Gosh, we take this for granted. I mean, we play the words over, we say the words over, but the depth of the meaning of it is profound. And God saw the light, that it was good. The quality of God, you see. Good is the quality of God, the nature of God. Just like God. The light is like God. It's God's own nature. And God divided the light from the darkness. So now we have God presenting his own idea of himself, breaking in to illumine thought, to form thought, and that idea is always of the same nature as God, the same nature as the mind that conceives it, namely good. The expression of the nature, you see, this is mind as spirit. We get the expression of God as good. We have God presenting himself, his idea, in reflection, she says. God presents the idea of himself first in light, second in reflection, his own reflection, the reflection of his own nature. God's Spirit dwelling in infinite light and harmony from which emanates the true idea is never reflected by aught but good. Aught but the good. Reflected in good only and bringing out its own inherent nature. You have a touch of that light of mind having the power to order itself, to divide, you see. God divided the light from the darkness. So you have a touch of Spirit coming in to divide now. It's not the dividing between or the separating between opposites, but we've already touched the sense of order. Order is so fundamental, so absolutely fundamental. And inherent in order then is the differentiation of the light. To be able to discern the difference, the diversification within the light, the infinite variety within that light. So we're not dealing with opposites, but with complementaries, we might say. And mind as spirit says, this is my own nature. I create only my own nature and quality and expression. What do we have with the second record? How does this deal with the second record? Mind as spirit, the counterfeit there, is that from a false creative sense arises the myth of a material creation. Now we have a myth really as a lie, right? The myth of a false creative sense, the myth of a material creation. So from the mist comes a myth, which will evolve into mythology as we go further. But here we see that the Bible account says, let me see, what does it say? There went up a mist from the earth, and watered. You see, this is the touch of the counterfeit of mind as spirit. It's the watering of the whole face of the ground, but the counterfeit of spirit is that watering. You see, that mistiness of thought waters everything down. It dilutes the idea of God. It dilutes mind's ideas, mind's creation. So it's a sense of weakening, of dualism. When you have watering, you have a sense of dualism. We might say of compromising, you see. When you compromise, you have the opposite of mind as spirit. And so you get that dualism versus the infinite good of God and God's allness. She says, from a mist arises the creation of matter, not the firmament. She already refers to the firmament, and we know that in the text, in the exegesis, that she would have already gone through the first record and would have told us what the firmament is. And now here, even at the point of the first stage of the second record, in mind as spirit, she can refer to that firmament, having already explained it. So she says it's not the firmament that's being created. It's not the understanding which God erects between the true and the false. But all is a material myth instead of the reflection of spirit. So instead of that ordering and dividing and differentiating, we get the diluting and the watering down of the second record. And we come to mind as soul. And God called the light day. You have a calling. When you call something, you name something. This is soul, right? Mind is soul. God called the light. The light now is named, is identified, and it is called a day. We have the institution of that value of a day. Now it will be possible for there to be a record, because there is something called a day. And associated with a day is the night. The darkness he called night. Wonderful, wonderful thing. It isn't negative. It isn't counterfeit. It belongs to the cycle of a day, the record of a day, that there be a night. Night is included in the day, in a day, right? And the evening and the morning were the first day. So we have day, we have night, we have evening, we have morning, all of these belonging to the concept of a day, to bring out cycles of light. You hear how positive that is, how beautiful that is, to bring out spiritual revolutions of consciousness, enabling there to be a record of light. Instead of one great undifferentiated light, the fact that there is a day, that light can be divided into days, ordered into days, differentiated through days, enables there to be a record. Soul is very much to do with a record. With a record, there being a record. Being states and stages of light. Bringing out what she says are spiritually clearer views of him. Not implied by material darkness and dawn, not solar time, she says. The successive appearing of God's ideas is represented as taking place on so many evenings and mornings. Words which indicate spiritually clear views of Him. And then she goes to that verse that we know. Here we have the explanation of another passage of Scripture, that one day is with the Lord as 1,000 years. And she hints to the 1,000-year periods, to give us a hint that those 1,000-year periods are patterned by the 7 days of creation. The rays of infinite truth, when gathered into the focus of ideas, bring light instantaneously, whereas 1,000 years of human doctrines, hypotheses, and vague conjectures emit no such effulgence. So she counters those 7 days and the 7,000-year periods, the infinite light of those days and periods, as against all the human doctrines and hypotheses and vague conjecturing that has accompanied those 7,000-year periods. Really a second record sense that is going out. Human doctrines are going out. Hypotheses are going out. Vague conjectures are going out under the light of mind. And this light is not material. Spirit is the light. No solar rays nor planetary revolutions form the day of spirit. Remember what we said about spirit, even though we're talking about mind and mind as soul, that it's the creation of spirit, it's the record of spirit, that first record. So it's the day of spirit that is being formed. Immortal mind makes its own record. Beautiful sense of it makes its own record. And mortal mind, she says, sleep, dreams, etc., have no record. They have no record. She refers to the second record presentation. So we get that clear identification, or that clear record of God and His creation versus God falsely identified in a false creative sense. I love very much that sense of a day having to do with a cycle. You know, whenever you have a cycle, you have a cybernetic sense. You have a self-returning within itself sense, a self-referring sense. And every day then is a cycle. You have the evening, and you know that the Jewish day, the Hebrew day, begins with the evening. And that's why the text says, in the evening and the morning. Please jump in if you know more, because I love to have that enlarged. That the evening and the morning were the first day. So, and you have that with each day, and the evening and the morning were the second day, and the evening. So it's the evening and the morning constituting that a true day, indicating these cycles of light. But also you see that what has been brought in is day and night. So if you look at the whole of a day, you have an evening, you have the night, you have the morning, and you have the day sense, the daytime sense of a day. In a way of a fourfold cycle in a day. as though the four, there's some sense of the four reflected in each day of creation. And no one thinks really, even the ordinary person doesn't think of the night as something negative, but as a phase of the day. No one ever says, or they don't announce on the news, oh, get ready now, it's almost nighttime, and be sure to do this and hide away here and get your gun ready and all that kind of thing. No one feels that way unless they have some kind of a psychological problem. The night belongs to the rhythm of a day. And I was telling them on the other coast, I had just had such a kind of a sweet experience, because I had been carrying around this concept, what is a day, and the night and the evening and the morning, carrying that around for months, just asking, quietly asking and hoping to get some light on that situation. And I felt that there was so much beauty in the sense of night in this context. And I had one evening turned on the evening news, and just as I was about to watch it, the phone rang. Not an unusual situation. And it was a fairly short phone call, and when I came back into the room, they were doing it like the last 2-minute segment of the evening news, and they said, now a special report having to do with the fact that apparently we need the night. We need the darkness. And can you imagine? I'm saying, what? This was just for me. And it was just a beautiful thing, because they told all the reasons why we need the dark, why we need the darkness. And we're telling about the tall buildings, the skyscrapers in all of the big cities and everything, and why they were turning off the lights in these skyscrapers and so forth. And they hastened to say it wasn't merely because of an energy shortage, but that it had to do with the birds. That they found that the birds were smashing into the buildings, flying into the buildings, because the lights were on in the buildings they couldn't see. They needed to have it dark. And that this belonged to the fulfilling of the whole cycle of their activity, that at nighttime they would fly, and at nighttime they did not want to have light. They could not have light. Well, the report just went on, and it told so many beautiful things and so many beautiful reasons for the sense of night and darkness, and also that it had very much to do with our immune systems. Isn't that an interesting thing? That the immune system needs to replenish itself. It needs to rest. It needs to rebuild, to regroup, and so forth. It just strikes me that's a soul tone. We're at the point of mind as soul. You know why the immune system has to do with soul, don't you? And who will tell me? Keeping intact, the immune system keeps the identity what it is, maintains the identity, that nothing can come in and undermine the identity, the self. It has a lot to do with the sense of self.
And isn't there something that plants do in the nighttime too? I think
Yes, yes, they interviewed, on this 2-3 minute segment, they interviewed photobiologists and, talked about how the plants need to have the nighttime. And, it was just beautiful to me to see that belongs to a cycle, the cycle of the day.
Sue, just for people who like words and poetry, I remember reading a little thing, a poem by John Greenleaf Whittier, and he talked about the night being the mother of the day. I just thought it was such a beautiful sense.
Yes, yeah.
Which would also coincide with the Jewish, with the evening beginning.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Right,
The
exactly.
mother.
Yeah,
beginning.
yeah, very much,
The day begins
very
with the
much so.
evening.
Yes, and somewhere here I have the, you see the, if you want to think of that day just in terms of evening and morning, you see that there are, there are 24 hours in a day, as though you had 2 periods of demonstration. You have the 12 of the evening, and you have the 12 of the morning. 2 standpoints of demonstration. And Mrs. Eddy defines evening in the glossary as peace, rest, and fulfillment, as though the new day comes out of the peace and the rest and the fulfillment of that which has gone before, of the preceding cycle. And then with the morning, you have a second standpoint or aspect of demonstration. She says the morning is light, truth, revelation, and progress. So you have the new sense, the new appearing with the morning, and then the fulfillment of it with the evening and the starting of the new cycle from the standpoint of love, from the standpoint of fulfillment. That love brings forth the new view of truth. You see, yeah.
But also in science, we can start our day over anytime we want. We're not limited, to the morning or to the night. Like, let's say halfway through the day something goes wrong, and you can always turn to God and back into the system, and that starts your day over.
Yes, it does. Yeah, that's very nice. Thank you, Bob. So our new day can take place at any time, any moment, because it is not it's not a material sense, a solar sense. It's a spiritual sense of a cycle. Yeah. Let's just take what she says about day in the glossary. The irradiance of life, light, the spiritual idea of truth and love. So you have life, truth, and love. And then she quotes, and the evening and the morning were the first day, and says the objects of time and sense disappear in the illumination of spiritual understanding, and mind measures time according to the good that is unfolded. The good that is unfolded. The unfolding, this unfolding is God's day, and there shall be no night there. But when she says that, she means there will be no second record sense there, no sense, no darkened sense. You follow? See how one term like night or darkness has to be understood in its context. In its context. Meaning is relational. Yeah, you can't give just one meaning to a term in science. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You're even saying now that you shouldn't have a night light or any kind of a light on while sleeping.
They said that too in those 3 minutes.
Same thing.
They did. They said you shouldn't even have a light bulb on, a low watt, nothing. Yeah. And not only that, then they went on, and they said that in cities where they had undertaken this new, view on things and were shutting off the lights, that these cities were, get this, safer. Yeah, Seoul again, you see, they were safer because those that were of a criminal bent couldn't see to do the things that they would do. They had to just stay at home. Yeah.
The opposite of conventional wisdom.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
But the equipollence of that, with the small child who is afraid of the dark, and you translate that with this definition of day, and it was used on me when I was a very young child because I could never sleep and I saw things all the time. And Mother and Father would come in and read to me out of Science of Health.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, that night became light. It was never a fearful thing. It wasn't a thing of darkness. And then again, in the photography profession, when you go into a dark room, you can never completely make it dark. It's impossible. So there's always a penetration of light, no matter where you are.
I love that, though, that the night became a day to you.
Yes.
Because you associated it with science, with being read to from the
Yes,
textbook. Yeah. Uh-huh. Beautiful.
And a lot of plants can't do what they need to do if they don't get darkness.
Exactly.
You wouldn't have poinsettias if you didn't have darkness.
Is that right? Uh-huh.
It's required. In October, like 12 hours of night.
Beautiful. Well, in the second record, what do we have as the counterfeit of mind as soul? My goodness, soul really took center stage there, didn't it? So this, now we've had that false creative sense as raising up a myth of material creation, the myth that there's any other creation but the creation of mind, which is spirit. And now, as soul, this material mythology involves idolatry, a false sense of God. It's the watering of the whole face of the ground, the watering of the identity, really watering down the identity of what God is. And it's into this part of the text that Mrs. Eddy brings up the question, who is God anyway? Is Elohim God or is Jehovah God? Who is the one that creates? If not God, Elohim, Spirit, then we have more than one God. And this is material mythology. And material mythology leads to idolatry. Idolatry being the counterfeit of soul. That you have a false image, a false sense of God, false image and likeness, not God in his own image and likeness. And so there is a blurring of the identity, a losing of the true identity when you have the idolizing of more than one God, God's many. So that the false sense of God, the false identity of God is, Mrs. Eddy could see that that was at the root of that claim of the first statement of the second record. And so she brings up there all the many false gods, not only Jehovah. She says the true ideas of God is almost lost with that term, Jehovah. She speaks of Baal, of Chemosh, of Moloch, of Vishnu, of Aphrodite, and of 1,000 other so-called deities. That these are the strange gods. And so it's the claim of pantheism, of many gods, material deities. and that we lose, she says, the true idea. I just love that sense. That's what's being presented with this first record, the true idea of God, of what God is. We lose the true idea or identity of God as love, the divine principle to be lived and loved. This is the identity of the Creator, mind as soul. Isn't that a gorgeous thing? I think it's gorgeous. That God would be misnamed in the second, misidentified, mistakenly defined, versus the true idea of God presented by mind, rightly defined as love, the divine principle, which can be lived and loved.
And that goes back to your definition that you gave us of Lord God Jehovah, which gives us a much expanded view of why she would say that the name of Jehovah is the true idea is almost lost.
Almost lost, yeah.
So that's, I thought that was extremely
Yeah,
wonderful.
I love that. Almost lost, but there's just the right information, enough information to catalyze and catalyze and catalyze that consciousness, that system of consciousness, out of itself, out of its own equilibrium, out of the sense of the Lord God Jehovah and into the Elohim.
What does Elohim mean?
Elohim means the Almighty God and is the name of God in the office of Creator. Thinking about the evening and the morning, we said that each one of the days, especially the first 6 days, refers to the evening and the morning. And I just wanted to go through those with you rather than waiting until we touch on each one as we go along through the order, to just see what Mrs. Eddy says about the evening and the morning at each of the 7 points, the closure of each of the 7 days. So at the end of the first day, we have seen that she says that the evening and the morning are bringing out spiritually clearer views of Him. You hear mind. In the second day, she says, thus the dawn of ideas goes on, forming each successive stage of progress. You hear a touch of spirit. In the third day, she says the third stage is the one of letting in the light of spiritual understanding, soul. This period corresponds to resurrection, soul, and that you have a reappearing in the third day. At the close of the third day, you get a reappearing sense. Then the evening and the morning in the fourth day of that, she says, God's infinite ideas, images, mark the periods of progress. This is an interesting one, periods of progress. We have to really hear or grasp the concept of periods being categories, and this will come very clearly to us as we take the fourth day and look at that universe, that true sense of universe and of system, that what you have are categories, a great progress and progression of categories in relationship. And then the fifth day of life, she says, advancing spiritual steps. You just hear life, advancing spiritual steps in the teeming universe, remember she says, of a spirit, lead on to spiritual spheres and exalted beings. The tone of life. And then in the sixth day, where creation is finished, the evening and the morning were the sixth day, she says, nothing is new to spirit. Nothing can be novel to eternal mind. Creation is finished. Divine science must become the interpreter. And at the close of the seventh day, it is the sense of the blessedness and sanctification of the day, the Sabbath day. So we can go on to the second day. And what does the second day do now? What will the second day show us? We can begin with the epitome from the first record at the point of spirit. Spirit, the second day now, will impart. It imparts the understanding which distinguishes between the real and the unreal. And you hear the tone of spirit. So here we will get a firm line of demarcation, really out of the first day, the fulfilling of the first day. And mind is spirit, mind is soul. That light is fulfilled in its requirements, and from that light, emerging out of that light as the origin, as the basis of everything, of creation, comes a sense of a firm line of demarcation, the ability to be able to distinguish, the differentiation, therefore, between ideas. That's actually what we have. We never have anything negative in that first record, although Mrs. Eddy will show the translatability of it. We know the translatability of being able to differentiate and order and distinguish between ideas is the difference between opposites. When that is translated, then we are able to separate opposites, able to tell the difference between ideas and illusions. This is a translated form, isn't it? To a level that is dealing with the second record of creation. Therefore, in the first day, we have to know what ideas are. And that's what we have just seen. What are ideas? To such an extent, we have to know them that we don't mix them up with anything else, with that which is not an idea. The first day then becomes the second day. And this becomes a firmament within us. It becomes understanding within our consciousness. That understanding which is so valuable, so practical, so useful in our lives. So the second will show us that consciousness must be pure, what the purity of consciousness is, that spirit is only spirit because it continually returns to mind, builds on mind, has its basis in mind, has only one source, mind, and this is our sense of purity, to continually return to mind for every answer, and that this is bringing out the order of spirit, the purity of spirit, the onlyness of spirit, and is shutting out any material conception. So, spirit as mind, what do we have as our epitome? Spirit's understanding separates spiritual ideas from human conceptions. Here you have a reference to human conceptions, a reference to just what we said, to the translating. This is what Mrs. Eddy shows in the exegesis, how that pure fact of spirit as mind translates itself such that we can separate ideas from false conceptions. And God said, "Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters." So you have already stated in spirit as mind that there is a firmament, and what that firmament does, it divides. This is the creative sense again, at the point of spirit as mind, the sense of let there be, the creative sense of life, truth, and love, the creative sense of mind, spirit as mind, the conception now of this idea of the firmament, and that firmament is the understanding within consciousness. What do we find in the second record? In the second record, the overall epitome for the second stage is that mingling spirit and matter creates evil beliefs. And spirit as mind, that the mingling of spirit and matter produces a mortal evil creation. So we had the firmament in the first record. What do we have in the second record? And the Lord God, Jehovah, I love that sense, that this is my limited sense of God, formed, thinks that man was formed, thinks that it can form man. Its creation of man is of the dust of the ground. The dust of the ground. And breathed into his nostril the breath of life, and man became a living soul. So you have the returning again to the ground. A mist came up and watered the whole face of the ground. Now we go back to the ground, and we take from the ground again, from that sense of nothingness. From nothingness, we draw another false conclusion, namely that man is made of the dust of the ground. It's a man of ignorance, of nothingness, and into this is breathed then something of an opposite nature, namely something of the Spirit. That Jehovah, the Lord God Jehovah, breathes into this the breath of life. You see, versus the breath of spirit. Remember that spirit that moved upon the face of the waters? Remember when we were taking that flow? The Spirit of God that moves upon the face of the waters is Spirit, capital S. Here we have the Spirit of God, really. It's a small s. It's not the Holy Ghost. It's not the pneuma hagion. It's not that descent, but it's that coming up from below and breathing into matter, a false sense, a mistaken sense of spirit. Putting spiritual life into matter. Thinking, and this is a great world concept, is it not? Huh? That matter is infused with spirit, that we as man are fundamentally matter and material, but that we have been infused with this breath of life, with this spiritual breath, so that we are matter and spirit, wed together. You hear that it is the mingling of spirit and matter producing a mortal sense of man, a false sense of man. So a false sense of God brings forth a false sense of man. Like produces like. What synonymous term is that? Like produces like? Huh? Spirit, right. She says a material organization is not the basis of man, spirit as mind. The non-intelligent cannot become the medium of mind, spirit as mind. Matter is not the reflection of spirit. Spirit cannot evolve its opposite, matter. Spirit cannot be injected into dust. Spirit cannot enter dust. Mind does not enter matter and become a mortal sinner. Everything good, she says, God made. Whatever is valueless, you see, whatever is not a value, a spiritual value, those wonderful values that we have seen of the 7 and the 4 and the 4 and the 3 and the 1, those values, whatever is not of them is valueless and therefore not good. God did not make, she says, God did not make that. What God has made was very good. So this is the subtone of spirit as mind. It's the man of the second record now that we have, the Adam man. And you see that he is formed, not created. As we said, this is not Elohim. It is a forming. And again, that term to create is a term designating a very special relationship that God has to man in the first record of creation. Adam is the man of the ground. You know that the term, I don't know whether it's Adama or Adama, means the ground, of the dust. And in the Century Bible, it says that this name may express the idea that man was named after the soil from which he was taken, which he later tilled and to which he returned. You hear that name Adam implies the mortal cycle, the opposite of the cybernetic cycle, which goes out under the workings of the divine calculus, being embedded in that higher system of the true cybernetic cycle. That cycle must go out. That mortal circle goes out. Yes, versus the creation from divine science. Always remember to go back to, in the beginning, God. In principle, there's only God. And that infinite one God has evolved from within itself. That divine principle evolves within itself, holds, contains its own self-genesis, out of itself, through itself, as itself, for itself. Spirit operating out of itself, through itself, as itself, and back to or within itself. This is the Spirit of God moving upon its own face, its own identity, that this has brought forth and called forth the impulsion of life, truth, and love to manifest itself as the true record of creation. And as someone said to me at one of the breaks, couldn't we call that record a code? And we certainly can call it a code. In fact, one of the meanings of the word, of the word, the term word, is to be a code. A word is a signal. It implies a message, that there's a message being sent. And it is coded. The message is in the code. So that I think that you wanted to show me, or to say to me with that, this would also have great meaning for us, that this is our code, our genetic code, isn't it? This is our genetic code. And we have nothing else but what is in that code. So just devote your life to decoding that code. Decode that code in a deeper and deeper way. And we have no other genetic code. Okay.